Hello, everyone. This is Tom Fox back for another episode, and you're in for a real treat today because I have with me Mike Munro. Turns out Mike and I are almost related because we practiced law in Houston, Texas for many, many years, somehow not running into each other. But we have now connected, and we've had some great fun on some prior podcasts. Mike writes some really interesting articles in the ESG space. So we're going to talk about Mike, his background, what he's up to now, and what he sees a little bit down the road. So Mike, with that incredibly long-winded introduction, first of all, welcome, and thank you so much for taking the time to visit with me today.
Great to be here, Tom.
Mike, could you tell our audience about your professional background?
Sure. I, right out of law school and got an MBA as well, I joined the Dow Chemical Company. I was with them for about 18 years in a variety of roles, including helping them create and manage their first compliance program after the Enron scandal. From there, I joined Baker Hughes for a short period of time. Then I became Chief Compliance Officer of Transocean Offshore Limited. We dealt with a number of corruption-related issues, as well as the BP Transocean Deepwater Horizon disaster and all the compliance-related issues associated with that. From there, I joined Norton Rose Fulbright, became a partner, was there for a short stint when they asked me to look at an interesting opportunity for one of their large clients, Odebrecht Engineering and Construction down in Sao Paulo, Brazil. I decided to take it, became that company's first chief compliance officer, where I built its compliance program and worked very closely with the monitors and all else that was involved with a $1 billion corruption scandal. From there, I formed my own firm, and that's what I'm doing now.
So could you tell us a little bit about your current firm, what led you to found it, and the type of services you guys provide?
Sure. I think we've really brought together an outstanding group of compliance and ESG professionals. Importantly, we are located all over the world, which of course is key when you're dealing with local issues and sometimes difficult jurisdictions. We come from a very broad and interesting range of backgrounds. Many of us, like myself, were chief compliance officers. We have former DOJ and SFO officials. We have the former chief integrity officer of the World Bank. We have two former KPMG partners, so we're really focused on the accounting and forensic side. And we also are very much looking at project management and that type of expertise to really handle projects in a unique way. Services we perform, a very broad range of your typical compliance-related services, whether it's helping to improve compliance programs, risk assessments, small to medium-sized investigations. We really have a lot of experience in M&A activities, so the work that has to be done when there's a merger and acquisition, especially in the integration phase, which again, you're often combining two compliance programs into one, and so that's always very interesting work. In addition, on the ESG space, we have really decided we need to focus on helping people understand what this is all about. And with my work at the OECD, we have been able to bring together the expertise to really help companies assess, one, what is happening, but most importantly, is how that applies to their business. So it's really a full range of consulting services, and we also have a particular emphasis on the use of effective technology.
Mike, you've written a few articles over the past few months that I found really intriguing and, more importantly, very helpful, but I wanted to focus on two for this podcast. The first was 2022 will be a pivotal year in ESG. And if I could maybe start with asking you, why did you write this article, and then maybe go into the details of it itself?
Sure. As I mentioned, I've been very much involved with the OECD the past few years. In particular, they are working on an initiative called the Blue Dot Network. And it's a very important initiative because what the objective is to have a certification standard for large infrastructure projects that would be adopted globally. And that standard is related to all of the ESG elements. And so as I started getting into that more deeply, it became very clear that this is an area where the analysis and working on putting together something that makes sense, because it is so complex, it is so varied, it is something that really needed to be done. So through that research, I've been following very closely, of course, as many others. And amazingly, 1 month, November, although there was a lot of things that happened before that, in November, there were a number of very significant announcements that came out that I thought it was important for people to know about, because in 2022, what has been announced as coming to the forefront and actually, publicly put out for people to ultimately have to follow in some cases, truly is significant.
So, Mike, I think one of the things that frustrates many practitioners in this space is either the lack of a unified reporting standard or perhaps even the lack of guidance from the regulators about which direction many of us should look. In the United States, that's generally tended to be the SEC, although there may be others, and also in the EU as well. What do you see coming, either in terms of reporting requirements or even some more specific regulations that ESG and compliance practitioners can begin to follow?
Well, the one benefit and positive aspect of, for example, the SEC and the EU through their directives, it's going to bring some specificity as to what needs to be tracked and reported on. And that's going to be helpful, because today, those of us who've been following ESG for some time, you do have a number of different standards that are out there, and outstanding organizations behind them, such as GRI and SASB and in others. So there's a varied amount of standards. But what, again, the SEC and the EU are going to do is have specific standards that need to be followed. What is expected from the SEC is that they will be announcing at a minimum some climate related requirements this year. There was actually an article that came out last week. I don't know how accurate it is, but it indicated that there may be some delay. There's some very important discussions going on surrounding materiality and whether what has to be reported needs to be material or not. And those types of things really do need to be worked through. However, everyone is expecting that the SEC will be issuing at least some climate-related, really emissions standards in this year. Now, whether it's next month or whether it's later, we don't know. There's also likely to be some human rights, maybe diversity type standards that will be issued. So it's relatively limited, but it will be positive when it comes out.
Mike, in many ways, the EU has been ahead of the United States, at least in a couple of areas, certainly in human rights, or rather human trafficking and modern slavery, and some other issues. Do you see that the United States being able to implement any type of guidance, if not regulations, or do you think most companies will take the lead from the EU in these areas?
That's a great question, and you're exactly right. The EU really has led that area in requirements for reporting. Switzerland has recently passed a law requiring reporting in that area. Germany as well. Probably similar to like data privacy, 5-10 years ago. That really has been led by Europe. I didn't see that particular issue referenced in what was put out by the SEC regarding their proposed rules. So I don't necessarily see that coming out in the short term. However, even just like data privacy, what typically happens in those specific areas, the EU implements, and then other countries, including the US or particular states like California with data privacy, they follow. So I do think ultimately that is going to have to be looked at, and that's really often a supply chain issue. Most global companies, in particular U.S. based companies, they are not involved and are very careful on making sure that their employees, are of age, and the slavery issues are properly addressed. So it's really, those areas are going to be a supply chain issue, and that's where it gets quite interesting.
So, Mike, one of the things the SEC does seem interested in is human capital. And do you see human capital as a broad enough category, at least defined by the Securities and Exchange Commission, to include diversity, inclusion, and other areas of employment, or does the SEC really mean something different?
I actually believe that that's what they mean. I believe there's going to be, as a rule suggests, some very specific reporting on diversity issues, which of course is important, and that's something that's relatively easily done. Companies do track male, female. They do track race, and so that type of reporting really won't be difficult. It's just going to be mandated, likely, and then there's going to have to be verification that the information is being put out. Now, then you could get into questions regarding contractors. A lot of companies use contractors, and whether contractors, for example, diversity will have to be reported on. So there are some nuances there that could make that area interesting. But without a doubt, the SEC is very, very concerned about human capital. My expectation is it will first jump in through the diversity window, and then it will expand to these other key areas that, as you mentioned earlier, that the EU is taking the lead on.
What about the IFRS sustainability standards? Do you see that continuing to evolve as to something that practitioners in this space will look to for guidance, or is that really something different?
Yeah. The interesting part about the IFRS Foundation that has recently created the Sustainability Board that is equivalent footing with their Financial Standards Board, is that if adopted, which they will be coming out, the IFRS Foundation will be coming out with specific ESG related standards, they say this year. So I think we can expect those. It's expected that they're going to be quite detailed. It's expected that they're going to be in line with SASB, because there's a merger that has been announced. SASB, the Value Added Foundation, into the IFRS Foundation later in the year. The Sustainability Board is set up just like the Accounting Standards Board is set up. And so, yes, there will be very specific standards that they're going to put out, and they're going to ultimately recommend that on a country by country basis, those standards are adopted as the financial standards are currently adopted in over 140 countries. Key aspect with that is once it becomes a standard to the level of the financial standards, that's where the verification and ultimately the auditing will come in, which really hasn't been the case in the past with sustainability reports and all this information. And Tom, the issues with greenwashing and the fact that many companies have been just reporting things without necessarily having the evidence behind it. What the IFRS Foundation is doing through their boards as these new standards are put out, and then as they are adopted country by country, which is expected they will be, it's a whole new ballgame, Tom, a whole new ballgame.
Mike, in addition to having a somewhat similar professional background, we were obviously both in the energy industry, and we both grew up during the sort of first big wave of FCPA cases starting in 04, 05, really through your work all the way up into this decade as well. And what I wanted to ask you is the evolution of FCPA and compliance was somewhat driven by the commentary from the regulators in terms of what constituted a best practices compliance program. And in the first decade of this century, we had some opinion releases. Of course, we had enforcement actions. In 2012, we had the FCPA Resource Guide, the first edition, and that edition has been superseded subsequently. But do you see the evolution in the regulatory or the regulatory commentary in ESG similar to what we saw in compliance, or is it something different in your opinion?
I think it's different. And the reason for that really comes down to the fact that with the FCPA, the bribery laws, guidance and focus, that really was all looking at what is an effective compliance program, or what is a compliance program with adequate protection, under the UK Bribery Act, and it goes on and on. So much of the guidance that has been put out by the regulators, importantly and helpfully, related to what does it mean to have a proper compliance program, which then allows a company to go through the whole process of, self-disclosing or entering into settlements and mitigating their damages. And the 9 elements of an effective compliance program, or 15 in Brazil, or whatever they are in their local laws. So it was important to have that type of detailed guidance. Professionals like us could properly counsel our clients as to what they needed to have regarding an effective compliance program. Okay, so that guidance was important. It came out, it's evolved. Every few years they come out with more guidance, which is great. And so we all have to look at it and evolve our programs to the new guidance. When you're looking at ESG, and this is something that I talk about a lot, even though it's a bit confusing and complex in particular because of all of these different standards that are out there, and it's not clear, which standard necessarily to follow, the process for managing what has to be done, I think, is relatively simple. What it is the collection of data. So you have to track the data, the facts that are out there properly, and then that data needs to be reported out, okay? And if there's a non-compliance, quote unquote, associated with that effort, it's going to be that the data was wrong, that the company did not properly obtain the data, track the data, and therefore there's a non-compliance. So what they reported out, it's like an accounting violation. You can, similar with the controls, there may be some direction on what controls you need to track this data effectively, but that will, I believe, primarily come out of the controls piece and, the accounting firms recommending what controls. But I do see a difference there, and I do see it as more simple in the fact that, again, the focus will be on getting the data. It has to be accurate, and then ultimately reporting it in an appropriate way. And of course, there's strategy around what companies need to do to improve their data and what, elements they may want to report on, because this all came from the PR side and sustainability. So it's, it's a little bit more complicated than that. But the regulatory side, again, I think is going to evolve more focused on the data needs to be correct, and it needs to be reported in an appropriate way. And if it's not, there's going to be consequences.
Like, that really leads to the next general topic I wanted to visit with you about, which was your article on compliance and ESG. And this is something that I've thought about a lot, written about, talked to a lot of people about. But I wanted to ask you, what do you see as the role of compliance in ESG?
Compliance, legal, of course, has a very significant role. At a minimum, the compliance should assist and be an advisor as these, in particular, new requirements are rolled out. And not just the requirements. Again, as I briefly mentioned, because sustainability reports have typically been led by the communications department of large company or public relations. They have their job, and their job is, to communicate and to communicate well. Where compliance comes in is that compliance needs to help the company understand what could be the risks associated with that communication. And in particular, what could be the local country risks, because the laws are very different, and countries treat issues very differently. For example, there's a couple countries that I've dealt with in very difficult situations where if there's a disclosure, if they're found to be a criminal violation or a violation of their local law in that country, the country manager will be arrested and put in jail, regardless of whether that violation happened 2 or 3 years ago or 10 years ago. The current country manager can be arrested. So it's going to be absolutely essential that compliance continues to play that role or gets more involved to assist. Secondly, the compliance program elements of training and education and working cross-functionally and pulling different groups together to help collect that information and organize that information is very helpful for companies, and they really should use that expertise that chief compliance officers have and the compliance programs have built. And then finally, there is a trend, and I think it's a very positive trend, that compliance, because of their oversight, historical responsibilities, because of their focus on all of the things I mentioned, such as training and working cross-functionally. In a number of cases, chief compliance officers, for example, are also becoming head of the ESG programs, the ESG efforts. And today it's happening more and more. I'm actually part of a webinar tomorrow on Thursday, where there are a couple individuals that are today have the chief ESG and compliance officer title and role, and they are managing both. And our understanding is it's going very, very well, and it's been really beneficial for the company for that dual role to be in place. And so that is something where I believe compliance can really add value to a company.
Mike, if I could turn to specifically the E in ESG. I think the E scares many compliance professionals because they perceive that is a highly technical component. And if they have a legal, educational, or professional background, they may not feel competent to really, if not head that effort, at least be a part of it, unless we're an environmental lawyer. So what are your thoughts around the role of compliance in the E in ESG?
I would equate that to the role compliance has had for a long time with HR issues. Right? So all companies have HR departments, chief compliance officers, directors of compliance. They are not experts typically in employment law. They are not experts in these very important areas that historically have also been part of many compliance programs in terms of collecting information, whether it's by managing the whistleblower helpline. People who've run these programs know, 70, 80% of issues that come in through helplines are related to HR issues. So really all that needs to be done is that there needs to be a basic knowledge and understanding of environmental matters and the issues that need to be reported on. There needs to be a close relationship with the compliance professionals, with the environmental group, so they understand and they're able to work together well, and they're able to assist in, again, the collection of the data, which it really will be the key here. So it really all that needs to be done, and again, I equate it very similarly to HR. Compliance professionals just need a general understanding of the issues, and they need a good relationship with the function, and with that, they can effectively manage what needs to be done and add value by helping the function train those who are collecting the data and reporting on the data and ensuring it's done. So I think it's a great point, and I know there are a lot of hesitation regarding environmental issues, which there probably were in HR initially for people who haven't had that background. But it's something that certainly can be managed, and it really is just tied to the cross-functional team and effort that the compliance professionals have had for years and years.
Do you see compliance officers as having a steep learning curve on global ESG initiatives? And if so, how would you suggest they begin to fill this knowledge void?
Well, I think it's just like anything else. Each individual, first of all, and that's a big reason I wrote those articles, need to understand that there is a real value for them to be aware of what's going on in the ESG space and the ties, as we've talked a lot about here, between ESG and compliance. So as soon as the person just has that basic understanding of the value, she or he needs to go out and do their own research. They need to listen to your podcasts. They need to read up on the material that's out there. And there are consultants and groups and others that have been working in this area for years and years and really can provide good insight. But as you know, really all you Google or Bing or whatever, ESG, and you're going to get lots of articles. So it's individual research. It's having the desire, and in some cases the passion, to really understand this area, realizing that it's going to bring true value to their organizations and to them professionally. This is such an important area. We all know for the world, everyone, environmental, social issues that are being looked at, the governance issues, including anti-corruption, all so important. And I truly believe vast majority of compliance professionals will see that, will see the value to them personally and professionally, and will seek that out and then help their organizations also understand the importance, but what really is behind this, because you can get there's a lot of smoke out there, and there, fear mongering and people trying, the sky's falling and all of that. So it's important to weed through all of that information and just learn the area and continue to learn the area like we all do, and we have been doing in compliance for 15, 20 years now.
Mike, if I could ask you to maybe turn to that veiled land of the future and ask you where you might see compliance officers, or what role compliance officers might be fulfilling in ESG in 2025 and beyond.
I really do believe the trend of compliance officers either directly overseeing ESG programs and compliance programs does make a lot of sense. At the same time, a number of, and even probably most of the largest companies have outstanding sustainability efforts in place, and they have vice president level people who have been managing this area. Some have an environmental background, some have a communications background. Some, I just talked to one yesterday, actually had a legal background, but she's never practiced as a lawyer. She's always been in the sustainability space. But I do see that trend moving, especially for companies who have not had long established ESG programs, sustainability reports. That's where the compliance officers, again, because of all of the expertise that they have, I believe are going to become more and more involved. And so 25 and beyond, it's just going to be a continuation of the recognition of the value of and the importance of ESG, which we all know is there, and it's going to now become more regulated and mandated, as we talked about. And then at the same time, the role of compliance professionals as they become more interested, more knowledgeable, as they are able to demonstrate value, like again, this upcoming conference that I'm involved in, they're going to be talking about what they're doing and the value that it brings. And so all of that is just going to continue the momentum through 25 and beyond, where this is going to be brought together. And it makes sense to bring it together at the executive level. And with the increase in importance, it's going to expand. Also, internal audit. There's going to be a lot of time as these areas become auditable. There's going to, just like compliance, be that close relationship between compliance and internal audit to ensure all of this is working properly and well, and there are no non-compliances in the ESG reporting.
Mike, unfortunately, we are near the end of our time for this episode, but I was wondering if our listeners wanted any more information on the topics we've touched on, perhaps to contact you or learn more about GCRM. How could they do so?
Very easy. We have a website, GCMR.com. You can Google it. All of our contact information is there. We would love to talk to you. Benchmarking is perfect. It's great when people reach out to us, even if they're not looking for assistance, because we're able to gain information and listening to people. We're able to share information, and that's something that we all very much enjoy doing.
Mike, I wanted to thank you again. This has been a ton of fun for me. I could probably sit and geek out with you for hours. So I look forward to perhaps continuing this conversation.
Okay. Thanks a lot, Tom.
All right.